The largest building of the ancient world was constructed by a man whose only surviving portrait fits in the palm of your hand. It is an ivory statuette, barely 7.5 centimeters tall, small enough to be a chess piece, and it depicts a figure seated on a throne, wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt, his right fist clenched against his chest. The face is stern but unremarkable. The body is stiff. The craftsmanship is competent but not exceptional. If you walked past it in the Cairo Museum without reading the label, you would not look twice. And yet this tiny figure is the only confirmed three-dimensional representation of the man who built the Great Pyramid of Giza, the single most famous, most studied, most debated structure in the history of human civilization. His name was Khufu. He was the second pharaoh of the 4th dynasty. He ruled Egypt for roughly 23 years, sometime around 2580 to 2560 BC, according to current estimates. And during that reign, he ordered the construction of a building that would remain the tallest man-made structure on Earth for more than 3,800 years. A building containing an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks. A building whose base covers more than 5 hectares, an area large enough to contain the cathedrals of Florence, Milan, and St. Peter's in Rome simultaneously, with room to spare. A building so precisely engineered that its base is level to within 2 centimeters across a span of more than 230 meters. A building that has been standing, essentially intact, for more than 4,500 years. The numbers are striking. The Great Pyramid originally stood roughly 146 meters tall, the height of a 48-story skyscraper. Each side of its base measures approximately 230 meters. The total mass of the structure is estimated at roughly 6 million tons. The outer casing, when intact, consisted of an estimated 115,000 blocks of fine white Tura limestone, each weighing between 2 and 15 tons, polished to a mirror finish and fitted so precisely that, according to the measurements of Flinders Petrie, a knife blade could not be inserted between the joints. The internal structure includes 3 known chambers, a complex system of ascending and descending passages, a gallery of unprecedented architectural ambition, and relieving chambers built from massive granite beams imported from quarries 800 kilometers to the south. And the man who built it, the man behind the most famous building on Earth, is almost entirely unknown. We do not know what he looked like except for that one tiny ivory figurine. We do not know where he was born. We do not know the names of his architects. We do not know how his pyramid was constructed, the specific methods, the ramp configurations, the organizational systems that made it possible to quarry, transport, and place 2.3 million blocks of stone in roughly 2 decades. We do not know why he chose Giza as his building site. We do not know the cause of his death, and we do not know where his body is. The mummy of the pharaoh who built the largest tomb in the ancient world has never been found. This is the central paradox of Khufu's legacy. The building is immense. The man is invisible. The monument speaks with a voice so loud that it has echoed across 4.5 millennia. But the person who commanded it built into existence has been reduced to an ivory figurine and a handful of inscriptions, a ghost behind the greatest construction project in human history. By the end of tonight, you are going to understand who Khufu was, what he built, and what it cost. You are going to see the Great Pyramid not as a static monument frozen in time, but as a living construction site, a place where tens of thousands of people labored for decades to raise a mountain of stone from the desert floor. You are going to confront the engineering mysteries that modern science still cannot fully explain, and you are going to ask a question that has haunted every visitor to Giza for the past 4,500 years. How is this possible? The paradox of Khufu extends beyond the disparity between the man and his monument. It touches on something deeper, something that goes to the heart of how civilizations remember their builders. The Great Pyramid is the most recognizable structure on Earth. It has appeared on currency, on postage stamps, on the covers of 10,000 books. It has been photographed from every conceivable angle, measured with every conceivable instrument, speculated about by every conceivable theorist. It is, in a very real sense, the symbol of human civilization itself, the image that appears in every encyclopedia, every world history textbook, every documentary about the ancient world. And yet the man who built it, the intelligence, the ambition, the will that brought it into existence, has been almost entirely effaced by the passage of time. We know the building. We do not know the builder. That gap between the monument and its maker is the subject of tonight's investigation. We are going to look behind the stone. We are going to search for the man. Before we get started, if you find these mysteries as fascinating as we do, take a second to like the video or subscribe. It is a simple action, but it helps this channel reach more curious minds like yours. Now, let us begin. To understand Khufu and his pyramid, we need to begin not at Giza, but at Dashur, 65 kilometers to the south. Because the Great Pyramid did not appear from nothing. It was the culmination of a century of engineering experimentation, a tradition of trial, error, and progressive refinement that began with the step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara and was brought to the threshold of perfection by Khufu's father, Sneferu. Sneferu was the most prolific pyramid builder in Egyptian history. He constructed at least 3 pyramids, the Maiden Pyramid, the Bent Pyramid, and the Red Pyramid at Dashur, consuming more stone by volume than any other pharaoh, including Khufu himself. His building program was the crucible in which the true pyramid form was forged, through catastrophic failure at Maiden, mid-course correction at the Bent Pyramid, and hard-won success at the Red Pyramid. By the time Sneferu died, around 2580 BC, his engineers had solved the fundamental problems of true pyramid construction: the horizontal coursework, the keyed casing stones, the bedrock foundation, the corbelled internal chambers. The technology was mature, the organizational systems were in place, and the labor force, trained through decades of large-scale construction, was at the peak of its capabilities. Khufu inherited all of this. He inherited the engineering knowledge, he inherited the administrative apparatus, he inherited the workforce, and he inherited the ambition, the conviction, rooted in 4 centuries of Egyptian kingship, that the pharaoh's pyramid was not merely a tomb but a cosmic necessity, a structure whose construction ensured the survival of the divine king in the afterlife, and, through the king, the continued functioning of the universe itself. But Khufu did not simply continue his father's program. He transformed it. Where Sneferu had built 3 pyramids of varying quality and ambition, Khufu concentrated his resources on a single structure, and he pushed that structure to the absolute limit of what the technology would permit. The Great Pyramid is not just bigger than Sneferu's pyramids, it is more precisely built. Its alignment to the cardinal points is more accurate. Its internal architecture is more ambitious. Its casing work was more finely finished. In every measurable dimension, the Great Pyramid represents an advance over the Red Pyramid, not a revolution in technique, but a refinement so thorough and so relentless that the result is qualitatively different from anything that came before. The question of who Khufu was, beyond his role as the builder of the Great Pyramid, is one of the most frustrating puzzles in Egyptology. The historical record is extraordinarily thin. We have the tiny ivory statuette found by Flinders Petrie at the Temple of Abydos in 1803, discovered, according to Petrie's own account, in a rubbish heap, broken and nearly discarded before someone recognized the cartouche of Khufu carved on the throne. We have a few inscriptions, mostly brief references in the tombs of officials who served during his reign. We have the references in later Egyptian literature, which paint a contradictory picture. The Westcar papyrus depicts Khufu as curious and somewhat gullible, while later Greek sources, particularly Herodotus, describe him as a cruel tyrant who impoverished his people to build the pyramid and even prostituted his own daughter to raise funds for the project. The Herodotus account, written more than 2,000 years after Khufu's death, is almost certainly unreliable. Herodotus visited Egypt around 450 BC, when the Old Kingdom was as remote to him as the Roman Empire is to us. His informants were Egyptian priests who may have been repeating folklore rather than history, and his own cultural biases, Greek assumptions about tyranny and the abuse of power, coloured his interpretation of what he heard. The story about Khufu's daughter is almost certainly fiction, but the image of Khufu as a harsh, demanding ruler may contain a kernel of truth, not as a historical fact, but as a reflection of the impression that the Great Pyramid itself made on later generations. A building of this scale implies a concentration of power so absolute that it is easy to imagine the man behind it as a tyrant. Whether that imagination corresponds to reality is another question entirely. The name Khufu is itself an abbreviation. His full name was Khufu, meaning Khnum protects me, a reference to the ram-headed god Khnum, who was believed to shape human beings on his potter's wheel. The name places Khufu within a specific theological tradition, a tradition centered not on the sun god Ra, who would become increasingly dominant in the later Old Kingdom, but on the older creator deity Khnum. Some scholars have read theological significance into this, suggesting that Khufu's pyramid was oriented toward a cosmology that differed in important ways from that of his successors, but the evidence is too thin to support firm conclusions. What we do know about Khufu comes primarily from the archaeological context of his pyramid and from the inscriptions in the tombs of his officials, his family members, and his workers. The Giza Plateau, where Khufu chose to build, was not a random selection. It sits on a massive limestone formation that provided an ideal foundation for a large pyramid, solid, stable, and capable of bearing the enormous weight of the structure without settling or shifting. The plateau also offered a convenient source of core stone, with quarries located just a few hundred meters south of the pyramid site, and it was highly visible, positioned on a prominent escarpment overlooking the Nile Valley and the city of Memphis, the ancient capital. The pyramid, when complete, would have been visible from virtually everywhere in the Memphis region, a constant, unavoidable reminder of the power of the king. The decision to build at Giza rather than at Darsha, where his father had built, was itself a statement. Khufu was not following in his father's footsteps. He was establishing his own domain, a new royal cemetery that would become, over the course of the 4th dynasty, the most famous archaeological site on Earth. Khufu's son Khafre and his grandson Menkaure would both build their pyramids at Giza, creating the iconic trio of monuments that has defined Egypt in the popular imagination for millennia. The organizational infrastructure that Khufu assembled for the construction of the Great Pyramid was the most sophisticated in the ancient world. The American archaeologist Mark Lehner, who has spent more than 3 decades excavating the workers' settlements and support facilities at Giza, has described the construction site as a temporary city, a purpose-built urban complex designed to house, feed, and manage the tens of thousands of workers required for the project. Lehner's excavations, conducted in partnership with the Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass, have revealed bakeries, breweries, fish processing facilities, copper workshops, and dormitory-style buildings capable of housing several thousand workers at a time. The scale of the provisioning operations is staggering. Lehner estimates that the workforce consumed thousands of cattle, sheep, and goats per year, along with vast quantities of bread, beer, and fish. The workforce itself has been the subject of intense debate. The old image of slave labor, whip-driven masses hauling blocks under a pitiless sun, has been thoroughly discredited by the archaeological evidence. The workers were not slaves. They were organized into teams with names and identities, names like Friends of Khufu and the Drunkards of Menkaure, that suggest a sense of group identity and even pride. The skeletal remains of workers buried in the cemetery near the construction site show evidence of healed fractures, broken bones that were set and allowed to mend, indicating that injured workers received medical care rather than being discarded. The diet was substantial. Analysis of animal bones from the workers' settlement shows that the laborers consumed significant quantities of beef, a luxury food that was not available to ordinary farmers. These workers were not treated as disposable labor. They were valued, maintained, and organized with care. The estimates of workforce size vary. Herodotus claimed that 100,000 men worked on the pyramid in 3-month shifts. Modern estimates are considerably lower. Most scholars now suggest a core workforce of 20 to 30,000 workers during peak construction periods, with additional seasonal workers brought in during the Nile flood, when agricultural labor was impossible. Even the lower estimates represent an enormous mobilization of human resources, a labor force comparable to the population of a large ancient city, assembled and maintained at a single construction site for 2 decades. The logistics of feeding, housing, and organizing this workforce would have required an administrative apparatus of extraordinary complexity. Every worker had to be assigned to a team. Every team had to be assigned a task. Every task had to be coordinated with dozens of other tasks: quarrying, transport, stone cutting, placement, surveying, provisioning. The supply chains that kept the site functioning. The grain from the farms, the cattle from the pastures, the stone from the quarries, the copper from the Sinai, the timber from Lebanon, had to be managed with precision, because a failure in any single chain could halt construction and waste precious time. Mark Lehner has described the Great Pyramid project as the equivalent of a modern megaproject, a construction operation comparable in organizational complexity to the building of a major dam, an aircraft carrier, or a state. The comparison is not hyperbolic. The Great Pyramid required the coordination of multiple supply chains, multiple specialist teams, and multiple construction phases over a period of roughly 2 decades, all under the direction of a centralized authority that had to maintain quality control, schedule adherence, and workforce morale throughout. The fact that the project was completed, and completed to an astonishing standard of precision, is a testament not just to the engineering skill of the builders, but to the administrative genius of the organizers. And at the top of that organizational hierarchy sat Khufu, not as a hands-on manager. The pharaoh did not supervise the quarries or direct the placement of individual blocks, but as the supreme authority whose will set the entire enterprise in motion, and whose continued support kept it running. The Great Pyramid was, in every sense, Khufu's project. It was his vision, his resources, his labor force, and his obsessive demand for precision that produced the most extraordinary building of the ancient world. The question that this raises, the question that lies beneath every discussion of the Great Pyramid, is why? Why did Khufu demand this level of perfection? Why did he push the technology to its absolute limit? Why was the Red Pyramid, which had satisfied his father, not good enough? The answer lies partly in the theology of divine kingship, the belief that the pharaoh's afterlife demanded the most magnificent and permanent dwelling place possible. But it lies partly in something more personal, something that the archaeological record hints at but cannot fully reveal. Khufu was not just building a tomb, he was building a legacy. He was building the structure that would define his civilization for all time, and he knew it. The discovery of the ivory statuette, Khufu's only confirmed portrait, is itself a story worth telling, because it illuminates both the grandeur and the fragility of the archaeological record. In 1803, Flinders Petrie was excavating at the Temple of Osiris at Abydos, in Upper Egypt. Far from Giza, far from the pyramid that had made Khufu famous, Petrie was meticulous, systematic, and obsessive about detail, qualities that made him one of the greatest archaeologists of the 19th century. And that also made him the kind of person who would sift through rubble that other excavators would have discarded. In a heap of debris near the temple, Petrie's workers found a small headless ivory figurine. The body was intact, a seated figure on a throne, carved in the rigid frontal style of Old Kingdom sculpture, but the head was missing. Petrie recognized the cartouche of Khufu on the throne and immediately understood the significance of the find. He halted all other work at the site and ordered his workers to sieve every grain of sand in the debris heap until the head was found. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of sifting through sand and rubble, searching for a piece of carved ivory less than a centimeter in size. But Petrie found it. The head was reattached to the body, and the complete statuette, 7.5 centimeters of carved ivory, depicting the builder of the largest pyramid in the world, entered the collection of what is now the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. The irony is almost too perfect. The man who built a monument containing 6 million tons of stone is remembered by a portrait that weighs a few grams. The building that was designed to guarantee his immortality has survived essentially intact for more than 4,500 years. The image of the man himself was found in a rubbish heap, headless, nearly lost forever. If Petrie had been less thorough, if he had not insisted on sieving every grain of sand, the only portrait of the builder of the Great Pyramid would be a headless torso in a museum drawer. Khufu's face would be lost entirely. This fragility of the personal record stands in stark contrast to the endurance of the monument, and it raises a question that applies not just to Khufu, but to every builder of the ancient world. Does the monument replace the person? Does the Great Pyramid, by its sheer overwhelming presence, make the individual who built it irrelevant? Or does the absence of the person make the monument more mysterious, more compelling, more haunted? The answer, as we shall see, is both. The social world of Khufu's court, the officials, the priests, the family members who surrounded the pharaoh, is somewhat better documented than Khufu himself, thanks to the tombs of his courtiers that line the streets of the Giza necropolis. The mastaba tombs of the 4th dynasty elite are arranged in neat rows east and west of the Great Pyramid, forming what Egyptologists call the Eastern and Western cemeteries. These tombs, built of limestone and decorated with carved reliefs and painted scenes, provide a window into the daily life, the administrative hierarchy, and the religious beliefs of Khufu's court. Among the most important of these tombs is that of Hemiunu, who held the title Overseer of all construction projects of the king. Hemiunu is widely believed to have been the chief architect of the Great Pyramid, or at least the senior official responsible for the project's overall management. His tomb, located in the Western Cemetery, contained a remarkable seated statue that is now in the Pelizaeus Museum in Hildesheim, Germany. The statue shows a heavy-set, broad-shouldered man with a round face and a confident bearing, a figure of authority, power, and physical substance. If the tiny ivory statuette is the only face of Khufu, then Hemiunu's statue is the face of his architect, the man who, in all probability, designed and directed the construction of the most famous building on Earth. Hemiunu was not a commoner who rose through the ranks. He was a member of the royal family, probably a nephew or cousin of Khufu, who held multiple titles in the royal administration. His position as overseer of construction placed him at the head of an organizational hierarchy that included dozens of specialist officials, overseers of quarrying, overseers of transport, overseers of provisioning, overseers of the various work gangs. Below these officials were the foremen, the skilled craftsmen, the surveyors, and the tens of thousands of labourers who did the actual work of quarrying, hauling, and placing the stone. The organisational chart of the Great Pyramid project, if it could be reconstructed, would resemble that of a modern corporation, a complex, multi-layered hierarchy designed to coordinate the efforts of thousands of individuals toward a single goal. The question of the workforce's composition has been revolutionized by the discovery, beginning in the early 1990s, of the workers' settlement south of the Great Pyramid. Lena's excavations revealed a planned community with streets, dormitories, administrative buildings, and industrial facilities, a purpose-built infrastructure designed to support the construction workforce. The settlement included a large gallery complex that Lena has interpreted as barracks for temporary workers. Long, narrow buildings with low sleeping platforms along the walls, each capable of housing 40 to 50 men. The total capacity of the gallery complex has been estimated at roughly 2,000 workers, a fraction of the total workforce, suggesting that additional housing has yet to be discovered, or that many workers were housed in perishable structures that have not survived. The industrial facilities in the workers' settlement provide the most vivid picture of life on the construction site. The bakeries, identified by the distinctive bell-shaped bread molds found in large quantities, were capable of producing thousands of loaves per day. The fish processing facilities, located near the edge of the ancient harbour, preserved fish by drying and salting, providing a protein-rich food that could be stored and distributed to the workforce. The copper workshops produced and maintained the tools used by the quarrymen and stonecutters, tools that wore out quickly when used against limestone, and that had to be constantly resharpened and recast. The diet of the workers, as reconstructed from the animal bones and plant remains found in the settlement, was surprisingly good. Cattle, sheep, goat, and fish were all consumed in significant quantities. The cattle, in particular, were luxury animals. Their presence in the workers' diet indicates that the labourers were being provisioned from the royal herds, at significant expense to the state. The bread was made from emmer wheat, the standard grain of the Old Kingdom, and was supplemented by beer, a thick, nutritious brew that served as both a beverage and a food. Workers in the ancient Egyptian construction industry were, by the standards of their time, well fed. But the picture should not be romanticized. The work was hard. The skeletal remains of workers buried in the cemetery near the settlement show evidence of arthritis, spinal compression, and repetitive stress injuries consistent with decades of heavy labor. Broken bones, while often healed, were common. The average age at death was relatively young. Most workers appear to have died in their 30s or 40s. The construction of the Great Pyramid was a monumental achievement, but it was also a monumental expenditure of human effort, human health, and human life. The financing of the project was, in economic terms, the single largest expenditure of the Egyptian state during Khufu's reign. The grain that fed the workers came from the royal granaries, supplied by taxes on the agricultural output of the entire Nile Valley. The cattle came from the royal herds. The copper for the tools came from mines in the Sinai, operated by state-sponsored expeditions. The timber for sledges, scaffolding, and boats came from Lebanon, imported by the royal fleet. The granite for the internal chambers came from Aswan, transported by state barges. Every element of the construction project was funded by the central government, which is to say, by the productive labor of the entire Egyptian population, channeled through the taxation system into the hands of the king. The proportion of the national surplus consumed by the Great Pyramid project is impossible to calculate precisely, but it was clearly enormous. The Egyptologist John Romer has estimated that the construction of the Great Pyramid was the largest single economic event of the Old Kingdom, an expenditure of resources so vast that it shaped the economic structure of the entire state. The quarries, the transport systems, the supply chains, the labor mobilization, all of these were organized and maintained by a bureaucracy that existed, in significant part, for the purpose of building the pyramid. The Great Pyramid was not a side project. It was the main project, the organizing principle around which the Egyptian state was structured during Khufu's reign. The relationship between the construction of the pyramid and the functioning of the state was not merely economic, it was organizational. The administrative systems that managed the pyramid project, the scribes who tracked rations, the overseers who coordinated work gangs, the surveyors who maintained alignment, were the same systems that administered the kingdom. The scribal schools that trained the pyramid's accountants trained the kingdom's tax collectors. The supply chains that fed the pyramid's workers provisioned the army. The corvée labor system that brought seasonal workers to Giza was the same system that maintained irrigation canals throughout the Nile Valley during the rest of the year. This interweaving of pyramid construction and state administration has led some scholars to argue that the Great Pyramid was, in a sense, a political technology, a project that strengthened the central government by giving it a purpose, a structure, and a workforce. The pyramid was the reason the bureaucracy existed, and the bureaucracy, having been created to build the pyramid, outlasted it, becoming the permanent administrative infrastructure of the Egyptian state for the next 2.5 millennia. Khufu's pyramid did not just express royal power, it generated royal power. It created the organizational systems that made the Egyptian state the most efficient and longest-lasting political entity of the ancient world. The religious dimension of the project was inseparable from the political one. The Great Pyramid was not merely a tomb, it was a machine for the transfiguration of the king, a structure designed to transform Khufu's mortal body into an immortal spirit and to launch that spirit into the sky, where it would join the circumpolar stars that never set. Every architectural feature of the pyramid, the ascending passages, the grand gallery, the king's chamber, the so-called air shafts that penetrate the body of the pyramid from the burial chamber to the exterior, has been interpreted as a component of this transfiguration machine. The passages are the paths of ascent. The chambers are the stations of transformation. The shafts are the channels through which the king's spirit departs the pyramid and ascends to the sky. This interpretation is supported by the pyramid texts, the oldest religious texts in the world, carved on the walls of later pyramids, which describe the dead king's journey through the underworld and his ascent to the sky in vivid, ritualistic language. The sky thunders, the earth quakes, the gods tremble when the king ascends, reads one passage. Although the pyramid texts were not inscribed until the 5th dynasty, more than a century after Khufu, they are believed to preserve much older traditions that were current during the 4th dynasty. The Great Pyramid was designed to accomplish what the texts describe: the elevation of the dead king to divine status, his merging with the cosmic order, his eternal existence among the stars. The rhythm of the construction was governed by the Nile itself. Each year, from roughly June to September, the river flooded, inundating the agricultural land of the valley and rendering farm work impossible. During this flood season, the labor that would otherwise have been devoted to agriculture was available for construction. The floodwaters also served a logistical function. They raised the level of the river and its canals, allowing heavy stone blocks to be transported by boat to locations that were inaccessible during the low water months. The harbours and channels that connected the Nile to the Giza Plateau, traces of which have been identified through geological survey, would have been navigable during the flood, enabling the delivery of casing stones from Tura and granite from Aswan directly to the construction site. When the waters receded and the agricultural cycle resumed, the seasonal workers returned to their farms. But a core workforce remained at Giza year-round: the skilled craftsmen, the surveyors, the administrators, and the specialist teams responsible for the most technically demanding aspects of the construction. The pyramid rose incrementally, layer by layer, year by year, through a process so sustained and so methodical that the result was a structure of extraordinary regularity and precision. Each layer had to be level, each course had to be aligned, each block had to be placed with attention to the blocks around it, the blocks below it, and the blocks that would be placed above it. The construction of the Great Pyramid was not just an act of strength, it was an act of relentless, painstaking, multi-generational attention to detail. The Great Pyramid of Giza is the most studied building on Earth. More books have been written about it than about any other single structure in human history. More theories have been proposed to explain its construction than for any other archaeological problem. And yet, after more than 2 centuries of systematic investigation, the fundamental question, how was it built, remains only partially answered. This is not because the Egyptians left no evidence. On the contrary, the evidence is abundant. The quarries that supplied the stone are identifiable. The transport routes are traceable. The tools used by the workers, copper chisels, stone pounders, wooden wedges and levers, have been found in large quantities. The workers' settlements have been excavated. The supply infrastructure has been documented. What is missing is not evidence but certainty. The evidence tells us what was done. It does not always tell us how it was done, at least not in the specific, step-by-step detail that would satisfy a modern engineer. The construction of the Great Pyramid can be divided into several phases, each of which poses its own engineering challenges. The first phase was site preparation, the leveling of the Giza Plateau to create a flat, stable foundation for the pyramid. The base of the Great Pyramid is leveled to within approximately 2 centimeters across its entire 230-meter span, a degree of precision that is difficult to achieve even with modern surveying equipment. How the ancient builders achieved this precision is debated. The most widely accepted theory involves the use of water leveling, flooding the surface with a thin layer of water and using the water's natural tendency to find its own level as a reference. But the details of the process, the construction of the leveling channels, the techniques for marking and cutting the bedrock to the desired elevation, the methods for verifying the results, are not fully understood. The second phase was the quarrying and transport of the core blocks. The vast majority of the stone used in the Great Pyramid, an estimated 2.3 million blocks, with an average weight of roughly 2.5 tons, was quarried locally from the limestone formation that underlies the Giza Plateau itself. The main quarry, located a few hundred meters south of the pyramid, has been identified and partially excavated. The marks of the ancient quarrymen's tools are still visible on the quarry walls. The parallel chisel marks, the wedge holes, the cutting channels that show how the blocks were separated from the bedrock. The quarrying process involved cutting channels around the perimeter of each block using copper chisels and stone pounders, then inserting wooden wedges into the base of the block and wetting them with water. The expansion of the wet wood cracked the block free from the bedrock, producing a rough block that could then be shaped and transported to the construction site. The transport of the blocks from the quarry to the pyramid, a distance of a few hundred meters, was accomplished using sledges, rollers, and manpower. Experiments conducted by Mark Lehner and others have shown that a team of roughly 20 workers can move a 2.5-ton block on a sledge over prepared ground, particularly if the ground is wetted to reduce friction. This finding, confirmed by a wall painting in the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep, that shows a colossal statue being moved on a sledge while a worker pours water in front of it, has significantly reduced the mystery surrounding the transport of the core blocks. The logistics remain impressive. Moving 2.3 million blocks at a rate of several hundred per day required an enormous number of teams working in coordinated shifts, but the basic technology is understood. The transport of the casing stones and the granite blocks poses a more serious challenge. The fine white limestone used for the outer casing was quarried at Tura, on the east bank of the Nile, roughly 13 kilometers from Giza. These blocks, which weighed between 2 and 15 tons, had to be transported across the river by boat and then hauled overland to the construction site. The granite used for the king's chamber, the relieving chambers, and the portcullis blocks was quarried at Aswan, more than 800 kilometers to the south, and transported by barge down the Nile. The 9 granite beams that form the ceiling of the king's chamber weigh between 25 and 80 tons each. Moving these beams from Aswan to Giza, loading them onto barges, navigating the Nile's cataracts, unloading them at Giza, and transporting them overland to the construction site was one of the most demanding logistical operations in the ancient world. But the greatest engineering challenge of the Great Pyramid is not the quarrying or the transport. It is the lifting. How were the blocks, particularly the heavy granite blocks used in the upper portions of the pyramid, raised to their final positions, at heights of up to 140 meters above the ground? This is the question that has generated more debate, more speculation, and more pseudoscientific nonsense than any other question in archaeology. And the honest answer is that we do not fully know. The evidence is insufficient to determine, with certainty, which method or methods the ancient builders used, but the mainstream theories, all of which involve some form of ramp, are plausible and well supported by both archaeological and experimental evidence. The simplest theory is the straight ramp, a long, inclined plane of earth and rubble, extending outward from one face of the pyramid, up which the blocks were hauled on sledges. The advantage of a straight ramp is its simplicity. It is easy to build, easy to use, and easy to understand. The disadvantage is its size. A straight ramp reaching to the top of the Great Pyramid, at a usable gradient of roughly 1 in 10, would need to be more than 1.5 kilometers long, and would contain almost as much material as the pyramid itself. The construction of such a ramp would have been a major engineering project in its own right, and no definitive archaeological evidence of such a ramp has been found at Giza. The spiral ramp theory proposes that a ramp was built wrapping around the exterior of the pyramid, spiraling upward as the pyramid rose. This configuration would require far less material than a straight ramp, but it has its own disadvantages. It would obscure the corners of the pyramid during construction, making it impossible to check the alignment and geometry of the structure as it was being built. The corners are the critical reference points for ensuring that the 4 faces of the pyramid converge at a single apex. If the corners were hidden behind a ramp for the duration of construction, maintaining the precision that characterizes the Great Pyramid would have been extremely difficult. The most innovative recent theory is the internal ramp hypothesis, proposed by the French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin in 2007. Houdin suggests that the lower portion of the pyramid was built using a conventional external ramp, which was dismantled after the first third of the construction was complete. The upper 2/3, according to Houdin, were built using an internal ramp, a spiraling passage built into the body of the pyramid itself through which blocks were hauled upward and then turned at the corners using a system of open notches. Houdin's theory is supported by several pieces of evidence. A microgravity survey of the pyramid, conducted by a French team, detected a spiral-shaped anomaly within the structure that could correspond to an internal ramp. And the open notches at the corners, predicted by the theory, correspond to features that have been observed by climbers and surveyors on the exterior of the pyramid. But Houdin's theory remains unproven. No internal ramp has been directly observed or excavated. The microgravity data is suggestive but not conclusive, and the theory has been criticized on technical grounds. Some engineers have argued that the turning mechanism proposed by Houdin would not work for the heaviest blocks, which would be too large and too heavy to maneuver through the narrow internal passages. And it gets stranger, because the ramp question is only one of many unsolved engineering mysteries surrounding the Great Pyramid. How were the 9 ceiling beams of the king's chamber, weighing up to 80 tons each, lifted to a height of roughly 43 meters and placed with millimeter precision? How were the casing stones, each one individually shaped to match the angle of the pyramid face, with joints so fine that they are invisible to the naked eye, cut and fitted with such extraordinary accuracy? How were the descending and ascending passages, which penetrate deep into the body of the pyramid at precisely maintained angles, surveyed and excavated in near total darkness? How was the Grand Gallery, a soaring corbelled passage 7 meters wide and 47 meters long, rising at an angle of 26 degrees, constructed with the precision and structural integrity that has kept it standing for more than 4,500 years? Each of these questions has been studied by engineers, architects, and archaeologists for decades. Each has generated plausible theories, but none has been definitively answered. The Great Pyramid remains, after more than 2 centuries of systematic investigation, a building that we can describe in extraordinary detail but cannot fully explain. This is not a failure of modern science. It is a testament to the achievement of the ancient builders. The Great Pyramid was built by people who possessed knowledge and skills that we have not yet been able to fully reconstruct. Knowledge that was transmitted orally through practice and apprenticeship, and that was never recorded in writing. The builders did not leave blueprints. They did not write construction manuals. They left only the building itself. And the building, for all its eloquence, does not explain its own creation. But here is what makes this truly terrifying. The engineering mysteries of the Great Pyramid are not mysteries of principle. We understand the physics. We understand the materials. We can calculate the forces, the angles, the weights, and the stresses. What we cannot fully reconstruct is the method, the specific, step-by-step procedure by which the ancient builders translated their knowledge into action. And this gap between knowing what was done and knowing how it was done is a gap that may never be fully closed, because the evidence that would close it, the wooden scaffolding, the hemp ropes, the organizational charts, the shouted instructions of the foreman, has long since vanished, leaving only the stone. The stone is eloquent, but it is not enough. The interior of the Great Pyramid is, if anything, more mysterious than its exterior. The known internal spaces include 3 chambers, several passages, and the Grand Gallery, a soaring corbelled passage that is one of the most extraordinary interior spaces in the ancient world. But the internal plan has never been fully explained, and recent discoveries suggest that the pyramid may contain spaces that have not yet been explored. The original entrance to the pyramid is on the north face, roughly 17 meters above ground level. A descending passage, cut through the pyramid's masonry and then into the bedrock below, leads downward at an angle of roughly 26 degrees to a subterranean chamber hewn from the living rock roughly 30 meters below the base of the pyramid. This chamber is rough and unfinished, its walls are crude, its floor is uneven, and a narrow passage extends from its south wall into the bedrock before terminating in a dead end. The purpose of the subterranean chamber is debated. Some scholars believe it was the original burial chamber, abandoned when the pyramid's plan was revised during construction. Others interpret it as a symbolic underworld, a representation of the cavern beneath the primordial mound where the dead king began his journey to the afterlife. Roughly 28 meters from the entrance, a concealed junction in the descending passage marks the beginning of the ascending passage, a corridor that rises at the same 26-degree angle through the body of the pyramid toward the upper chambers. The junction was originally sealed by 3 massive granite plugs, each weighing several tons, which were slid into position from above after the king's burial. These plugs, still in place today, prevented access to the upper portions of the pyramid for thousands of years, until the Abbasid Caliph al-Mamun's workers tunneled around them in the 9th century AD, creating the rough passage that tourists use to enter the pyramid today. The ascending passage leads to the Grand Gallery, and the Grand Gallery is where the engineering of the Great Pyramid reaches its most breathtaking expression. The gallery is a corbelled passage roughly 47 meters long, 8.6 meters high, and 2.1 meters wide at its base, narrowing to 1 meter at the ceiling. Its walls rise in 7 successive corbelled courses, each projecting roughly 7.5 centimeters beyond the one below, creating a soaring, narrow vault that tapers toward the top like the nave of a Gothic cathedral. Except that the Grand Gallery was built more than 3,800 years before the first Gothic cathedral. The stonework is magnificent. The blocks are fitted with a precision that leaves almost no visible gaps, and the surfaces are smooth and regular. Standing in the Grand Gallery and looking upward along its length is one of the most powerful architectural experiences on Earth, a sensation of being enclosed in a space that is simultaneously massive and precise, ancient and timeless. At the top of the Grand Gallery, a short horizontal passage leads to the king's chamber, the room that was almost certainly Khufu's burial place. The king's chamber is a rectangular room roughly 10.5 meters long, 5.2 meters wide, and 5.8 meters high, constructed entirely of red granite imported from Aswan. The walls, floor, and ceiling are all granite, massive blocks, each weighing several tons, fitted together with tight joints and smooth surfaces. At the western end of the room stands the granite sarcophagus, a plain, undecorated box of red granite, roughly 2.3 meters long and 1 meter wide. It is slightly wider than the ascending passage, which means it was placed in the chamber during construction, before the passage was sealed, rather than being brought in after the pyramid was completed. The sarcophagus is empty. It has been empty for as long as anyone can remember. There is no inscription on it. There is no lid. Whether Khufu's body was ever placed inside it, and if so, when and by whom it was removed, is unknown. The mummy of the pharaoh who built the largest tomb in the ancient world has never been found. The most elaborate burial preparation in human history, a pyramid containing 6 million tons of stone, a burial chamber of imported granite, a sarcophagus carved from a single block of stone, was not sufficient to protect its occupant. The tomb robbers found their way in, as they always did, and the king, for all the stone that surrounded him, was taken. Above the king's chamber, 5 relieving chambers, stacked one above the other, each with a flat granite floor and massive granite beam ceiling, distribute the enormous weight of the pyramid above. These chambers, first entered by Colonel Richard Howard Weiss in 1837 using gunpowder to blast through the stone, are among the most important spaces in the pyramid from an archaeological perspective. On the walls of the relieving chambers, Weiss discovered red ochre inscriptions left by the work gangs who built the pyramid, rough graffiti marking the gang names, and, in one chamber, the cartouche of Khufu himself. These inscriptions are the only texts found inside the Great Pyramid. They were never meant to be seen. They were left on blocks that were sealed inside the structure during construction, invisible and inaccessible for more than 4,500 years. They are the voices of the builders, preserved in red paint on granite, speaking across the millennia. The gang, the companions of Khufu, one inscription reads. Another marks the team as the friends of Khufu. These are not the words of slaves. They are the words of workers who identified themselves by their relationship to the king, who saw their labor not as oppression but as service. And it gets worse, because recent discoveries have revealed that the Great Pyramid may contain spaces that have never been entered by any human being since the day the pyramid was sealed. In 2017, an international team of physicists using muon tomography, a technique that uses naturally occurring subatomic particles from cosmic rays to detect voids inside solid structures, announced the discovery of a large void above the Grand Gallery. The void, which the researchers named the Big Void pending further investigation, is at least 30 meters long and has a cross-section similar to that of the Grand Gallery. Its purpose is unknown. Its contents, if any, are unknown. It has not been entered or directly observed. The discovery of the Big Void electrified the archaeological world. The possibility that the Great Pyramid contains a large, unexplored chamber, a space that may have been sealed since the 26th century BC, that may contain artifacts, inscriptions, or other evidence of Khufu's burial, is tantalizing. But accessing the void without damaging the pyramid is an enormous technical challenge. No drilling or excavation has been authorized. The void remains sealed, invisible, and mysterious. A secret that the Great Pyramid has kept for 4,500 years and that it is not yet ready to reveal. The discovery of the Big Void also highlights the limits of our knowledge about the Great Pyramid's internal structure. If a space 30 meters long can remain hidden inside the most studied building on Earth for 4.5 millennia, what else might be concealed within the 6 million tons of stone? The Great Pyramid is not a solid mass. It is a structure, a designed intentional arrangement of spaces and solids, passages and chambers, voids and masses. And we do not yet have a complete map of that arrangement. We know the exterior, we know some of the interior, but we do not know all of it. The Great Pyramid still has secrets. The Egyptologist Mark Lehner, reflecting on decades of work at Giza, has written that the Great Pyramid is less a building than a landscape, a three-dimensional terrain of stone in which every surface, every joint, every course of blocks contains information about how the structure was built, how it was used, and what it meant to the people who created it. Reading that information requires not just archaeological skill, but a kind of architectural empathy. The ability to imagine what the builders were thinking, what problems they were solving, what choices they were making, block by block, course by course, over the span of 20 years. That empathy leads, inevitably, to a confrontation with the scale of the achievement. The Great Pyramid is not just an engineering marvel, it is an expression of organizational genius, a demonstration that a Bronze Age society, using copper tools and human muscle, could coordinate the efforts of tens of thousands of individuals over decades and produce a building of extraordinary precision and permanence. The achievement is not just architectural, it is social, administrative, logistical, and economic. It is the full mobilization of a civilization's capabilities toward a single goal, and that goal, the eternal survival of the king, was achieved, in a sense that Khufu could not have anticipated. The king's body is gone. The king's spirit, if it ever existed, is beyond the reach of archaeology. But the king's name endures, and the building that carries his name has survived for more than 4,500 years. If immortality can be achieved through stone, Khufu achieved it. But here is the problem. The immortality of the building has come at the cost of the immortality of the person. The Great Pyramid is so large, so overwhelming, so all-consuming in its presence, that it has eclipsed the man who built it. Khufu is not remembered as a person. He is remembered as a pyramid. His identity has been absorbed into his monument, like a sculptor absorbed into his sculpture. The building has become the man, and the man, behind the building, has disappeared. This is the central grief of Khufu's story, not the grief of a tomb robbed or a mummy lost. Though both of those griefs are real, it is the grief of a person reduced to a building, of a human being, with thoughts, feelings, fears, ambitions, a family, a court, a kingdom, compressed into a geometric shape on the desert floor. The Great Pyramid tells us that Khufu existed. It does not tell us who he was. And the silence behind the stone, the absence of the person behind the monument, is the most haunting feature of the most famous building on Earth. The so-called air shafts of the Great Pyramid add another layer of mystery to the internal architecture. 4 narrow shafts, 2 from the king's chamber and 2 from the queen's chamber, penetrate the body of the pyramid at steep angles. extending from the chambers toward the exterior of the pyramid. The shafts from the king's chamber emerge on the north and south faces of the pyramid, open to the sky. The shafts from the queen's chamber do not reach the exterior. They terminate within the body of the pyramid, blocked by small stone slabs. The purpose of these shafts has been debated for decades. The traditional interpretation that they served as ventilation shafts, providing air circulation to the interior chambers, has been largely abandoned. The shafts from the queen's chamber do not open to the exterior, and therefore could not have functioned as ventilation. The current consensus favors a ritual or astronomical interpretation. The shafts may have been designed to align with specific stars or celestial features. The pole star in the north, the constellation Orion in the south, that played a role in the king's afterlife. The alignment of the southern shaft from the king's chamber with the constellation Orion and the northern shaft with the circumpolar stars is consistent with the pyramid text's descriptions of the dead king's journey to the sky. In 1993, a robot sent into the southern shaft from the Queen's chamber by the German engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink discovered a small stone door with copper fittings at the end of the shaft, a tantalizing barrier that suggested the existence of a concealed space beyond. A subsequent expedition in 2002, sponsored by the National Geographic Society, drilled a small hole through the door and inserted a camera, revealing a small space behind the first door and another stone door. What lies behind the second door remains unknown. The exploration was halted, and no further investigation has been authorized. The Khufu boat, a full-size cedar vessel discovered in a sealed pit at the base of the Great Pyramid in 1954, provides one of the most evocative connections between Khufu, the man, and Khufu, the monument. The Egyptian archaeologist Kamal el-Malak, investigating the area south of the pyramid, noticed a line of limestone blocks set into the bedrock. When the blocks were removed, they revealed a pit, more than 30 meters long and 4 meters deep, containing a disassembled wooden ship, carefully stacked in 13 layers, its timbers preserved by the airtight seal of the pit. The reassembly of the ship, carried out over more than a decade by the master restorer Ahmed Yusuf Mustafa, produced a vessel of breathtaking beauty, 43.6 meters long, with a graceful curved hull, a high prow and stern, and a cabin amidships. The ship, built of Lebanese cedar, was designed for actual sailing. Its hull planking was lashed together with rope rather than nailed, a construction technique that allowed the hull to flex in the water. Whether the ship was ever used, whether it carried Khufu's body to Giza as part of his funeral procession, or whether it was a purely symbolic vessel intended to carry the king's spirit across the waters of the underworld, is debated. But its presence, sealed in a pit at the foot of the pyramid, speaks to the intimacy of the relationship between the king and his monument. The pyramid was not just a building, it was a universe, a complete, self-contained world designed to provide Khufu with everything he needed for eternity: a house, a boat, a passage to the stars. A second boat pit, identified adjacent to the first, was opened in 2011 using a remote-controlled robot. The second ship was found in worse condition than the first, but is currently undergoing conservation and restoration at the Grand Egyptian Museum near Giza. Together, the two boats represent the most complete examples of ancient Egyptian shipbuilding ever discovered. Masterpieces of woodworking that complement the stoneworking mastery of the pyramid itself. The precision of the Great Pyramid's external geometry remains one of the most difficult aspects of its construction to explain. The base is aligned to true north with an accuracy of less than 3 arc minutes, a precision that was not surpassed until the construction of the Royal Greenwich Observatory in the 17th century. The 4 sides of the base are equal in length, to within a margin of roughly 4.5 centimeters across a span of 230 meters, a relative error of less than 0.02%. The right angles at the corners are accurate to within fractions of a degree. These are not the tolerances of a rough construction. These are the tolerances of a precision instrument. How was this level of accuracy achieved? The most widely accepted explanation for the cardinal alignment involves the observation of stars, specifically the circumpolar stars, which appear to rotate around the celestial pole and can be used to establish a precise north-south line. The Egyptologist Kate Spence has proposed that the builders used the simultaneous observation of two stars, Kochab and Mizar, which flanked the position of the celestial pole during the mid-3rd millennium BC, to establish the alignment. Spence's theory is supported by the fact that the alignment error of the pyramids, built before and after Khufu's time, correlates with the predicted error of the two-star method at different dates, as the positions of the stars shifted due to the precession of the equinoxes. The levelling of the base was accomplished, according to most scholars, using water. A shallow trench was cut around the perimeter of the base, flooded with water, and the high points of the bedrock were cut down to match the level of the water surface. The bedrock within the perimeter was then levelled to a uniform elevation, producing the extraordinarily flat platform on which the pyramid was built. This technique, simple in principle, demanding in execution, required meticulous care and repeated verification. The fact that the builders achieved a result accurate to within 2 centimeters over a distance of 230 meters suggests that they repeated the leveling process multiple times, checking and correcting at every stage. The casing of the Great Pyramid, the smooth outer surface of fine white Tura limestone that originally covered the entire structure, has almost entirely disappeared, stripped away by medieval quarry workers who found a convenient source of pre-cut building material for the construction of mosques and fortifications in Cairo. Only a few casing stones remain in place at the base of the pyramid, and these give some indication of the original quality. The stones are cut to precise angles, their outer faces polished to a smooth finish, their joints so tight that they appear to be a single continuous surface. The removal of the casing has exposed the rough core blocks beneath, giving the pyramid its current stepped, weathered appearance, an appearance that, while iconic, is a pale shadow of what the building looked like when it was new. When complete, the Great Pyramid was a smooth-sided, gleaming white tower, reflecting the Egyptian sun with an intensity that must have been visible from dozens of kilometers away. It was not just a building, it was a beacon, a marker of royal power that dominated the landscape of the Memphis region and announced the presence of the king to every corner of his domain. The Pyramidion, the capstone that crowned the apex of the pyramid, has never been found. It may have been gilded or covered in electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, so that it would catch the first and last rays of the sun each day, glowing like a point of fire above the desert. If so, the visual effect would have been extraordinary. A mountain of white stone, topped by a point of gold, rising from the desert floor like a crystallized sunbeam. The loss of the Pyramidion is one of the many small losses that, accumulated over 4.5 millennia, have diminished the Great Pyramid from what it was to what it is. Still magnificent, still awe-inspiring, but a diminished echo of its original glory. The Great Pyramid of Giza does not stand alone. It is part of a complex, and part of a tradition that extends across centuries and across continents. To understand what Khufu achieved, we need to see his pyramid in the context of the monuments that surrounded it, the monuments that followed it, and the monuments built by other civilizations that, independently and without knowledge of Egypt, attempted to solve the same fundamental problem: how to build something that endures. The first and most immediate context is the Giza Plateau itself. When Khufu chose Giza as his building site, the plateau was empty, a barren limestone escarpment overlooking the Nile Valley, significant only for its geological suitability and its visibility. By the time Khufu's grandson Menkaure completed his pyramid, Giza had been transformed into the most famous archaeological site on Earth. A carefully planned landscape of 3 major pyramids, 6 smaller pyramids, the Great Sphinx, 2 mortuary temples, 3 valley temples, multiple causeways, and hundreds of mastaba tombs for the royal elite. The planning of the Giza complex reveals a level of architectural vision that goes far beyond the construction of a single pyramid. Khufu did not simply build a tomb. He designed a ceremonial landscape, a sacred precinct in which every element was positioned in deliberate relationship to every other element. The pyramid itself was the centerpiece, but the mortuary temple on its eastern face, the causeway leading down to the valley temple near the edge of the cultivation, the subsidiary pyramids for the king's queens, and the mastaba cemeteries for the royal officials. All of these were integral components of a unified plan. The Giza complex was, in effect, a city for the dead, a permanent urban landscape in which the king and his court would dwell for eternity. Khafre's pyramid, the second of the three great pyramids at Giza, was built by Khufu's son on a site slightly to the southwest. Khafre's pyramid is slightly smaller than Khufu's. Its base is roughly 215 meters on a side, compared to Khufu's 230. But it is built on higher ground and retains a significant portion of its original casing stones at the top, giving it the appearance of being taller than the Great Pyramid when viewed from certain angles. This visual trick may have been intentional, a son asserting his status while not openly exceeding his father's achievement. Khafre's complex also includes the Great Sphinx, a colossal limestone sculpture of a lion with a human head, carved from a natural limestone outcrop in the quarry that supplied stone for the pyramid. The Sphinx, roughly 73 meters long and 20 meters high, is the largest monolith sculpture in the ancient world and one of the most recognizable images in human civilization. The relationship between the Sphinx and the pyramids has been the subject of intense speculation. Most scholars believe the Sphinx was carved during Khafre's reign, based on its proximity to his valley temple and causeway. But the question of whether the Sphinx was part of Khufu's original plan for the Giza complex, or whether it was added by Khafre as an independent project, remains debated. The geological evidence suggests that the Sphinx's enclosure was quarried before Khafre's pyramid was built, which could mean the Sphinx predates the second pyramid. But the archaeological evidence, including a fragment of a stela found between the Sphinx's paws that appears to mention Khafre's name, points in the other direction. The debate is unresolved, and it illustrates the frustrating incompleteness of our knowledge about even the most studied archaeological site on Earth. Menkaura's pyramid, the smallest of the three, was built by Khufu's grandson on a site to the southwest of Khafre's. Its base is roughly 108 meters on a side, less than half the width of the Great Pyramid, and its height, when complete, was roughly 65 meters. The reduced scale has been interpreted in various ways, as evidence of diminishing resources, as a reflection of changing priorities, or as a conscious choice by Menkaura to invest more heavily in the quality of his temple complex rather than the size of his pyramid. The lower 16 courses of Menkaura's pyramid were cased in red granite from Aswan, a dramatic visual effect that would have set the base of the pyramid apart from the white limestone casing above. Whether the granite casing was ever completed is debated. Some scholars believe Menkaura died before the work was finished, and the upper portions were completed in cheaper limestone by his successor. Together, the three pyramids of Giza represent a peak of the Egyptian pyramid tradition, the moment of maximum investment, maximum precision, and maximum architectural ambition. After Menkaure, the tradition declined. The 5th dynasty pharaohs built smaller pyramids at Abusir and Saqqara, using lower quality materials and less sophisticated construction techniques. The 6th dynasty continued the decline. And after the collapse of the Old Kingdom around 2100 BC, the great age of pyramid building was over. It would never return. But the impulse to build monumental structures, to raise lasting markers of power, belief, and identity, did not die with the Old Kingdom. It reappeared in different forms, in different cultures, across the ancient world. And each of these reappearances illuminates, by comparison and contrast, what made the Great Pyramid unique. The ziggurats of ancient Mesopotamia, stepped temple platforms built of mud brick, rising in tiers toward the sky, are the closest formal parallels to the Egyptian pyramids. The Great Ziggurat of Ur, built around 2100 BC, stood roughly 30 meters high and served as the base for a temple dedicated to the moon god Nana. But the ziggurats were fundamentally different from the pyramids in both material and function. They were built of mud brick, not stone, and required constant maintenance and reconstruction. They were temples, not tombs, living centers of worship rather than sealed monuments for the dead, and their preservation has been poor. No ziggurat has survived intact. Even the best preserved examples are heavily reconstructed. The temple pyramids of Mesoamerica offer another revealing comparison. The Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan, built in the 1st century AD, has a base nearly as large as the Great Pyramid, roughly 225 meters on a side, but stands only about 65 meters tall. It was built of rubble and earth contained within a stone-faced shell, using a construction technique fundamentally different from the solid stone construction of the Egyptian pyramids. The Maya pyramids, from the towering temples of Tikal and Calakmul to the iconic pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, represent centuries of independent architectural development. They are steep, narrow structures with temple rooms at the summit, their surfaces decorated with elaborate carvings and stucco reliefs. They are impressive, but they are not comparable to the Great Pyramid in either scale or precision. The technology of solid stone construction that the Egyptians mastered under Snefru and Khufu was never replicated by any other ancient civilization. The comparison with the Roman Pantheon highlights a different aspect of the Great Pyramid's uniqueness. The Pantheon, built under Hadrian around 125 AD, is a masterpiece of engineering. Its unreinforced concrete dome, 43.3 meters in diameter, remained the largest dome in the world for nearly 18 centuries. But the Pantheon was built with a technology, concrete, that the Egyptians did not possess. The Great Pyramid was built with a far more primitive technology, cut stone, copper tools, human muscle, and yet it is more durable than the Pantheon. The Pantheon has survived thanks to continuous use and maintenance. The Great Pyramid has survived despite millennia of neglect, quarrying, and earthquake. The longevity of the Great Pyramid is a function not of its technology, but of its design. The inherent stability of the pyramid form, the quality of the limestone, and the sheer massiveness of the structure. These are advantages that no other architectural form possesses. The medieval cathedrals of Europe, the closest Western parallels to the Egyptian pyramids in terms of ambition, cost, and cultural significance, were built over periods of decades or centuries, consuming enormous resources and employing thousands of workers. Chartres Cathedral, begun in 1145 and substantially completed by 1260, is a masterpiece of Gothic architecture whose stained glass, sculptural programs, and structural innovations represent the peak of medieval European building technology. But Chartres is 800 years old. The Great Pyramid is 4,500 years old. The cathedral, built of soft limestone and relying on a complex system of flying buttresses to transfer the lateral thrust of its vaults, requires ongoing maintenance to survive. The Great Pyramid, built of hard nummulitic limestone in a self-supporting pyramidal form, requires no maintenance whatsoever. It is, in engineering terms, the most stable and durable large building ever constructed. This comparison raises an uncomfortable question. Have we, in the 5 millennia since the Great Pyramid was built, produced a building that is more durable? The answer is almost certainly no. Modern skyscrapers, built of steel and glass, have design lifespans measured in decades. Modern bridges are designed for a century of service at most. Even modern concrete structures, the most durable buildings we currently produce, are expected to last a few hundred years before requiring replacement. No building constructed in the modern era is designed to last 4,500 years. No building constructed in the modern era will last 4,500 years. The Great Pyramid is not just an ancient marvel, it is a challenge, a demonstration, still unanswered after 4.5 millennia, that human beings are capable of building something that endures. The question of what Khufu's engineers knew and what we have lost is one of the most unsettling aspects of the Great Pyramid's legacy. The builders of the 4th dynasty possessed knowledge of construction that we cannot fully reconstruct. They could cut stone with a precision that approaches machine-age standards, using nothing but copper tools and abrasive sand. They could transport blocks weighing up to 80 tons over distances of 800 kilometers. They could align a building to true north with an accuracy that was not surpassed for 3,000 years. And they could organize a construction project of staggering complexity, coordinating tens of thousands of workers, managing multiple supply chains, maintaining quality control over millions of individual blocks. with an efficiency that modern project managers find difficult to equal. This knowledge was not abstract, it was embodied, carried in the hands, the eyes, and the minds of the workers who practiced it. And when the practice diminished, when the pyramids grew smaller and less frequent, when the demand for large-scale construction expertise declined, the knowledge diminished with it. By the end of the Old Kingdom, the construction techniques that had produced the Great Pyramid were fading. By the Middle Kingdom, they were gone. The knowledge that Khufu's builders had accumulated over a century of practice was lost, not to catastrophe, not to conquest, but to the simple, relentless process of forgetting that accompanies disuse. The archaeologist Dieter Arnold has documented this decline in meticulous detail, tracing the progressive deterioration of construction quality from the 4th dynasty to the 6th. The core blocks grow smaller, the coursework grows less regular, the internal chambers grow less ambitious. The decline is not dramatic, it is gradual, incremental, almost imperceptible from one generation to the next. But accumulated over 2 centuries, the effect is devastating. The builders of the 6th dynasty pyramids could not have built the Great Pyramid. The knowledge was gone, and it has not returned. The loss of construction knowledge in the late Old Kingdom mirrors a pattern we see repeated across civilizations. The Roman Empire, at its peak, built roads, aqueducts, and concrete structures of extraordinary durability. After the fall of Rome, the knowledge of concrete was lost for more than a millennium. European builders did not rediscover the technique until the 18th century. The Maya civilization, at its peak, produced astronomical calculations of remarkable accuracy and built cities of impressive scale. After the Maya collapse, the knowledge of their writing system, their calendar, and their engineering techniques was lost, not fully recovered until the 20th century. In each case, the pattern is the same. A civilization develops sophisticated knowledge through centuries of practice and investment. The civilization declines through environmental stress, political fragmentation, foreign conquest, or some combination of factors. And the knowledge, which was maintained through living practice rather than recorded in durable form, disappears with the practitioners. The knowledge is not destroyed, it is simply not transmitted. And the result is a gap, a discontinuity in the chain of human understanding that can take centuries or millennia to repair. The Great Pyramid is, in this sense, both a triumph and a tragedy. It is a triumph of human engineering, a building of such extraordinary precision and permanence that it has survived 4,500 years of neglect and abuse. But it is also a tragedy of human knowledge, because the knowledge that built it has been lost, and we cannot fully reconstruct it from the building alone. The pyramid tells us what was done. It does not tell us how. And that gap between the achievement and the understanding is a reminder that knowledge is the most fragile of all human creations. The legacy of the Great Pyramid in the Western imagination deserves its own chapter, because the monument has served, for more than 2 millennia, as a canvas onto which every generation has projected its own obsessions, anxieties, and fantasies. The Greeks saw it as a wonder, a marvel of engineering that demonstrated the power and sophistication of a civilization older than their own. Herodotus devoted extensive passages to describing the pyramids and speculating about their construction, establishing a tradition of wonder and speculation that has continued unbroken to the present day. The Romans treated the pyramids as tourist attractions, monuments to be visited, admired, and documented. Roman tourists carved their names on the casing stones, a practice that dismays modern conservators, but that provides useful dating evidence for the state of the monuments during the Roman period. The Arab conquerors of Egypt in the 7th century AD regarded the pyramids with a mixture of awe and frustration. Awe at their scale, frustration at their impenetrability. The Abbasid Caliph al-Mamun, who ordered the tunneling into the Great Pyramid in the 9th century, was reportedly searching for treasure and scientific instruments. He found neither, only empty chambers and sealed passages. The European encounter with the pyramids during the Enlightenment and the colonial period produced a flood of measurement, mapping, and theorizing that laid the foundations of modern Egyptology. Napoleon's expedition of 1798 brought scientists and surveyors to Giza, producing the first accurate measurements of the pyramids and the first systematic documentation of the surrounding monuments. The publication of the Description de l'Egypte, the multi-volume record of Napoleon's scientific expedition, introduced the pyramids to European intellectual culture and sparked a wave of interest that continues to this day. But the Enlightenment encounter also introduced a less productive tradition, the tradition of pseudo-scientific speculation about the pyramids. The idea that the Great Pyramid was built by an advanced lost civilization or by extraterrestrial visitors has been a persistent feature of popular culture since the 19th century. The measurements of the pyramid have been endlessly manipulated to reveal hidden mathematical relationships. The value of pi, the dimensions of the Earth, the speed of light, that are presented as evidence of superhuman knowledge on the part of the builders. These claims are, without exception, unfounded. The mathematical relationships are artifacts of selective measurement and confirmation bias. The inevitable result of looking for patterns in a structure with many measurable dimensions. The alleged precision of these relationships does not withstand rigorous statistical analysis, and the underlying premise that the ancient Egyptians could not have built the Great Pyramid using the technology available to them is contradicted by the extensive archaeological evidence of quarries, tools, workers' settlements, and construction techniques that document the building process in considerable detail. The persistence of pseudoscientific claims about the pyramids is, in one sense, a tribute to the monument's power. The Great Pyramid is so impressive, so precisely built, so overwhelming in its scale that it triggers disbelief. The feeling that something this extraordinary cannot have been produced by ordinary human beings using ordinary technology. But the disbelief is misplaced. The Great Pyramid was not built by aliens or by a lost civilization. It was built by the people of the Nile Valley, farmers, quarrymen, stonemasons, surveyors, scribes, and administrators, organized by one of the most efficient state systems in the ancient world, and motivated by a religious ideology that made the construction of the king's tomb the most important project imaginable. The real mystery of the Great Pyramid is not how it was built. The real mystery is why we find it so difficult to believe that human beings could have built it. That difficulty, that persistent, irrational reluctance to credit the achievement to the people who actually achieved it, says more about us than it does about the pyramid. It reveals a failure of imagination, an inability to conceive that people who lived 4,500 years ago, who used copper tools and hemp ropes and human muscle, could have been as intelligent, as skilled, as organized, and as determined as we are. They could, they were, and the Great Pyramid is the proof. The Giza complex continued to evolve long after the last pyramid was completed. During the New Kingdom, more than 1,000 years after Khufu's death, the Sphinx was partially buried in sand and was the object of a royal restoration by Pharaoh Thutmose IV, who installed a stela between its paws, describing a dream in which the Sphinx promised him the throne in return for clearing the sand. During the Saite period, in the 7th and 6th centuries BC, there was a revival of interest in Old Kingdom culture, and the pyramids were objects of pilgrimage and veneration. During the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, Giza was a tourist destination, attracting visitors from across the Mediterranean. Through all these centuries, the Great Pyramid stood, altered by time but not diminished by it. The casing stones were gradually stripped away, beginning in the 14th century AD, when Sultan Nasir ad-Din al-Hassan ordered their removal for the construction of mosques and fortifications in Cairo. The removal of the casing exposed the rough core blocks beneath and reduced the height of the pyramid by roughly 9 meters. The pyramidion was lost. The mortuary temple on the east face was dismantled for its stone. The causeway was buried. The valley temple was destroyed by the rising water table of the Nile, and yet the pyramid itself endured. Earthquakes that toppled buildings across the Mediterranean left the Great Pyramid standing. The climate, dry, stable, and free from the freeze-thaw cycles that destroy stone buildings in northern latitudes, preserved the limestone. And the sheer mass of the structure, 6 million tons of stone, distributed in the most stable geometric form possible, provided an inherent resistance to damage that no other building could match. The Great Pyramid is, in engineering terms, almost indestructible. It would take a deliberate, sustained, and enormously expensive effort to dismantle it, and even then, the task would take years. This indestructibility is itself a kind of message, a statement about the relationship between human will and physical reality. The Great Pyramid says, "I was built to last, and I have lasted, and I will continue to last, long after the civilization that built me, and the civilizations that wondered about me, have themselves crumbled into dust." The stone does not care about human memory. It does not require our attention or our understanding. It simply endures, patient, massive, and indifferent, as it has endured for 4,500 years. The question of what the Great Pyramid means to us, to the people living in the 21st century, separated from its builders by more than 4 millennia of history, is ultimately a question about what we value. Do we value permanence? The Great Pyramid achieved it. Do we value precision? The Great Pyramid embodies it. Do we value the ability to organize large numbers of people toward a common goal? The Great Pyramid demonstrates it. Do we value the ambition to build something that outlasts its builders? The Great Pyramid is the most successful expression of that ambition in human history. But if we value the memory of individuals, if we believe that the people behind the achievements matter as much as the achievements themselves, then the Great Pyramid confronts us with a failure. The building survived. The builder did not. The monument endured. The man was lost. And the question that the Great Pyramid poses, 4,500 years after its completion, is whether we can close that gap, whether we can recover the man behind the stone, the person behind the monument, the human intelligence behind the geometric perfection. The answer, as archaeology stands today, is that we cannot fully close the gap. Khufu remains a figure defined by his absence, a pharaoh whose presence is felt through the magnitude of his monument rather than through the specifics of his biography. We know he was the son of Sneferu. We know he married at least 2 women, Meritites and Hanutsan, who were buried in small pyramids adjacent to his own. We know his reign lasted roughly 23 years. We know his vizier was named Hemiunu, and we know he built the largest pyramid in the world. Beyond these bare facts, the man dissolves into speculation. Was he the cruel tyrant of Herodotus's account, who impoverished his people to build his monument? Or was he the genial, curious figure of the Westcar papyrus, who listened with delight to tales of magic and wonder? Was he a visionary, who understood the significance of what he was building? Or was he simply following the tradition established by his father and grandfather, building a pyramid because that was what pharaohs did? The archaeological record does not answer these questions. It provides facts without personality, dates without emotion, measurements without meaning. And the Great Pyramid itself, the monument that was supposed to preserve Khufu's identity for eternity, is the ultimate expression of this limitation. It preserves everything about the achievement and nothing about the achiever. It is the most eloquent silence in the history of human construction. The Giza necropolis continued to attract burials for thousands of years after the Pyramid Age. During the 26th dynasty, more than 2,000 years after Khufu, wealthy Egyptians were still seeking burial near the Great Pyramid, drawn by the sacred power of the site and by the enduring prestige of the monuments. The latest burials at Giza date to the Roman period, nearly 3,000 years after the pyramids were built. No other cemetery in the world has been in continuous use for such a span of time. The power of the pyramids to attract the dead, to serve as magnets for burial, generation after generation, millennium after millennium, is itself a testament to the enduring impact of what Khufu built. In the modern era, the Great Pyramid has become the most visited archaeological site in the world. Millions of tourists come to Giza each year, arriving by bus and car from Cairo, climbing the plateau to stand at the base of the pyramid and look up at its weathered face. The experience is overwhelming, not because the pyramid is beautiful, though it possesses a stark geometric beauty, but because it is large. Incomprehensibly, impossibly, absurdly large. Standing at the base and looking up, the mind struggles to process the scale. The blocks at the base are taller than a person. The structure rises above you like a cliff face, receding toward a summit that seems impossibly high. The sky is immense, the desert is vast, and the pyramid fills both, a geometric mountain that dominates the landscape with a physical authority that no other human structure possesses. That experience, the experience of standing at the base of the Great Pyramid and being overwhelmed by its physical reality, is the experience that connects every modern visitor to every ancient visitor. The Greek travelers of the 5th century BC felt it, the Roman tourists felt it, the medieval Arab scholars felt it, Napoleon's soldiers felt it, and we feel it today, the same primal response to scale, to permanence, to the sheer improbability of a building this large, this old, this relentlessly present. The Great Pyramid does not ask to be admired, it demands acknowledgement. It occupies the landscape with a physical authority that makes everything around it, the city, the people, the modern world itself, seem temporary and insubstantial. The comparison with other ancient monuments is not merely academic, it reveals the specific qualities that make the Great Pyramid unique. The Colosseum in Rome is impressive but deteriorating. The Parthenon in Athens is magnificent but ruined. The Great Wall of China is vast but composed of many independent sections built over centuries. Angkor Wat in Cambodia is elaborate but vulnerable to the tropical climate. None of these monuments combines the three qualities that define the Great Pyramid: extreme precision, extreme scale, and extreme durability. The Great Pyramid is the only ancient building that achieves all three simultaneously. And that combination is what makes it, in the judgment of most architectural historians, the single most extraordinary building ever constructed. The pyramid's influence on subsequent architecture is both direct and diffuse. The Greeks, who admired the pyramids but built in a very different style, absorbed the Egyptian principle that monumental buildings should be built of stone and designed to endure. The Romans, who controlled Egypt for 4 centuries, incorporated Egyptian architectural motifs into their own building program. Obelisks, sphinx sculptures, and pyramid-shaped tombs appeared in Rome and throughout the empire. The neoclassical architects of 18th century Europe, inspired by both Greek and Roman models, created the monumental stone buildings, courthouses, government offices, banks, and universities that define the Western architectural tradition. And behind all of these stands the original demonstration made at Giza 4,500 years ago. That stone could be used to build on a scale that dwarfed anything previously imagined. The construction workforce at Giza has been the subject of a quiet revolution in Egyptological understanding. For most of the modern era, the popular image of pyramid construction was shaped by Herodotus's account and by the biblical narrative of the Exodus, both of which suggested that the pyramids were built by enslaved masses, whipped and starved, driven to their deaths by a merciless king. This image, however vivid, is almost certainly wrong. The archaeological evidence discovered at Giza since the 1990s tells a very different story. The Workers' Cemetery, excavated by Zahi Hawass, contains the burials of several hundred labourers who were interred near the construction site, a privilege that suggests they were valued members of the community rather than disposable slaves. The skeletons show evidence of medical care, fractures that were set and healed, amputations that were successfully performed, dental work that addressed abscesses and infections. The workers were not treated with indifference. They were treated with something approaching respect. The organization of the workforce into named gangs, each with its own identity, its own esprit de corps, and its own competitive relationship with rival gangs, suggests a system closer to a modern construction crew than to a slave labor camp. The gang names, preserved in the quarry marks and graffiti found throughout the pyramid complex, reveal a spirit of collective identity that is difficult to reconcile with the image of coerced misery. These were people who took pride in their work. They identified themselves not as victims but as friends of Khufu, as people who saw their labor as service rather than suffering. This does not mean the work was pleasant. It was hard. It was dangerous. It shortened lives and broke bodies. The skeletal evidence makes this abundantly clear. But it was not slavery, at least not in the sense that the modern world uses the term. The workers were provisioned by the state, housed in organized settlements, cared for when injured, and buried with dignity when they died. They were, by the standards of their time and by any reasonable comparison with other ancient labor forces, well treated. The broader question of what the Great Pyramid meant to the people who built it, not the king, not the priests, not the architects, but the ordinary workers who hauled the stone, is one that the archaeological record can only partially answer. Did they believe in the religious purpose of the project? Did they see their labor as sacred service or as unavoidable obligation? Did they take pride in the monument they were helping to create? The quarry marks suggest pride. The careful burials suggest community. The sheer persistence of the effort, 20 years of continuous labor, suggests a workforce that, whatever its motivations, was committed to the project in a way that goes beyond mere obedience. The Great Pyramid was not built by slaves. It was built by a society, whole society, organized from top to bottom around a single overwhelming purpose. The king provided the vision. The architects provided the design. The bureaucrats provided the organization. And the workers provided the muscle. Together, they produced something that none of them could have produced alone. The Great Pyramid is not the achievement of an individual. It is the achievement of a civilization. The persistence of the Great Pyramid through every vicissitude of the last 4.5 millennia invites a final comparison with the monuments of our own age. The tallest building currently standing, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, completed in 2010, rises to a height of 828 meters, more than 5 times the height of the Great Pyramid. It is a magnificent structure, built of reinforced concrete and glass, with a design lifespan of roughly 100 years. When its structural life is complete, it will be demolished and replaced. The materials, the steel, the concrete, the glass, will be recycled or discarded. Within 200 years, no trace of the Burj Khalifa will remain. The Great Pyramid, built 4,500 years ago, with nothing but limestone and human muscle, will still be standing. The oldest building will outlast the tallest building by a factor of 40 or more. The simplest technology will prove more durable than the most sophisticated technology. And the lesson, that permanence is a function of design, not of technology, will continue to be taught by a building that was old when the Parthenon was new, that was ancient when Rome fell, and that will still be standing long after the last skyscraper has been demolished and forgotten. There is a moment in the study of the Great Pyramid when the engineering questions fall away, and something else takes their place. The measurements have been recorded. The theories have been surveyed. The construction phases have been identified. And yet the building continues to resist full comprehension, not because the facts are insufficient, but because the scale of the achievement exceeds the capacity of facts to convey its meaning. The Great Pyramid is not just a large building, it is a statement about what human beings are capable of when they direct the full resources of an organized society toward a single goal. It is a demonstration that a Bronze Age civilization, using the simplest of tools and the most abundant of resources, stone and human muscle, could produce a building of such precision and permanence that it would outlast every other structure on Earth for more than 4,500 years. The achievement is not just architectural, it is philosophical. It says something about the human species that no other artifact says with the same force. We can build things that last. Let that sink in. In a world where everything we create seems designed for obsolescence, where our phones are replaced every 2 years, our cars every 10, our buildings every 50. The Great Pyramid has been standing for more than 4,500 years. It has outlasted every empire that has ever existed. It has outlasted every language that was spoken when it was built. It has outlasted the religion that motivated its construction. It has outlasted the civilization that produced it, and it shows no sign of stopping. The Great Pyramid will almost certainly be standing in another 4,500 years, long after our own civilization has been forgotten. This is not science fiction. This is the sober assessment of structural engineers who have studied the pyramid's construction. The pyramid form is the most inherently stable, large-scale structure that can be built with masonry. Its mass is concentrated at the base, creating a center of gravity so low that the structure is essentially immune to overturning. Its faces slope inward, directing the weight of the upper courses downward and inward rather than outward. Its joints, while imperfect, are held in compression by the enormous weight above them, which actually strengthens the structure rather than weakening it. The Great Pyramid is, in engineering terms, a structure that grows stronger as it grows larger, a building whose very mass is its principal defense against destruction. The grief at the heart of the Khufu story is not the grief of a destroyed civilization or a lost city. It is the grief of a lost person. We know the building. We do not know the builder. We can measure the pyramid to the millimeter. We cannot reconstruct the personality of the man who ordered its construction. The 7.5 centimeter ivory statuette, the only confirmed portrait of the builder of the largest ancient building on Earth, tells us nothing about who Khufu was as a person. His face, as carved in ivory, is generic, a conventional Old Kingdom pharaoh, indistinguishable from dozens of other royal portraits. His thoughts, his feelings, his relationships, his private moments, all of these have been consumed by the monument he built. There is an irony here that borders on the cosmic. Khufu built the Great Pyramid to preserve his identity for eternity. The pyramid was supposed to guarantee that his name, his spirit, and his memory would survive forever. And in a narrow sense, it succeeded. Khufu's name has survived, his pyramid has survived, but the person, the human being behind the name and the monument, has not survived. The pyramid preserved the fact of Khufu's existence, but not the content of that existence. We know that he was. We do not know who he was. Let that sink in. The most elaborate and expensive effort to preserve an individual identity in human history. A building containing 6 million tons of stone, designed by the most skilled engineers of the age, built by tens of thousands of workers over 2 decades, failed to preserve the one thing it was designed to preserve, the person. The body was taken by robbers. The face was lost, except for a tiny figurine found in a rubbish heap. The personality was reduced to a few ambiguous references in later literature, and the building, the 6 million tons of stone that were supposed to guarantee immortality, became paradoxically the agent of the person's erasure. The monument is so overwhelming that it has replaced the man. Khufu is not remembered as a person. He is remembered as a pyramid. This is the deeper truth of the Great Pyramid. It is not a lesson about engineering or architecture. It is a lesson about the relationship between human beings and their creations. The things we build outlast us. The monuments we erect to preserve our memory eventually consume that memory, replacing the person with the artifact, the individual with the icon. Khufu set out to build something that would make him immortal. He succeeded, but the immortality he achieved was the immortality of the building, not of the man. The Great Pyramid is immortal. Khufu is a ghost. The pattern recurs throughout history. Shakespeare is remembered as the author of his plays, not as a person. His inner life is as mysterious to us as Khufu's. Napoleon is remembered as a conqueror, not as a human being. Einstein is remembered as a genius, not as a man. In every case, the achievement has consumed the achiever. The work has replaced the worker. The monument has erased the builder. But the Great Pyramid takes this pattern to its extreme. Because the Great Pyramid is not just a monument, it is the monument. The oldest, the largest, the most enduring, and the most famous monument in human history. And the man behind it is not just anonymous. He is the most anonymous builder of the most famous building ever built. The gap between the fame of the achievement and the obscurity of the achiever is, in Khufu's case, wider than for any other figure in human history. Something is wrong with our assumptions about the relationship between building and remembering. We assume that to build something great is to be remembered. Khufu's story suggests otherwise. To build something truly great is to be consumed by it, to become invisible behind the wall of stone that was supposed to preserve your name forever. The workers who built the Great Pyramid are remembered by their graffiti. The red ochre inscriptions on the stones of the relieving chambers, identifying the gangs that quarried and placed them. The friends of Khufu, the companions of Khufu, these anonymous workers, who never expected to be remembered at all, left traces of themselves that are in some ways more vivid and more human than any trace Khufu himself left behind. Their names identify them by their relationship to the king. Their marks show the tools of their trade. Their bones, buried in the cemetery near the construction site, tell the story of lives spent in hard physical labor. They are more real to us, in a strange way, than the king they served. The workers have bodies, the workers have injuries, the workers have names, however generic. The king has a pyramid, and the pyramid, for all its grandeur, tells us less about the person inside it than a broken bone tells us about the worker who hauled the stone. The digital age has made this paradox even more acute. We live in a world of unprecedented documentation, a world in which every moment of every life can be photographed, recorded, and archived. And yet the question remains, will anyone 4,500 years from now know who we were? Our digital records are stored on media that will degrade within decades. Our servers require constant electricity, cooling, and maintenance. Our file formats become obsolete every few years. The totality of human digital civilization, every photograph, every video, every document, every email, exists in formats that will be unreadable within a century. The Great Pyramid, built of nothing but cut stone, will outlast every server farm on Earth. The simplest technology of the ancient world will prove more durable than the most sophisticated technology of the modern world. And the lesson is clear. Permanence belongs to the physical, not the digital, to the stone, not the silicon, to the pyramid, not the cloud. The contemplation of Khufu and his pyramid leads, inevitably, to a confrontation with our own mortality and our own ambitions for permanence. Every generation faces the question that Khufu faced. What will survive us? What mark will we leave on the earth? What will the future know of who we were and what we valued? Khufu answered these questions with 6 million tons of limestone. His answer has lasted 4,500 years. It will last for thousands more. But it is an incomplete answer, an answer that preserved the fact of his existence while losing the substance of his life. We face the same dilemma. We build our monuments, our skyscrapers, our bridges, our digital archives, and we hope that they will carry our names into the future. But the history of the Great Pyramid suggests that the relationship between building and remembering is more complex than we imagine. The building may survive, the memory may not, the structure may endure, the person may vanish, and the future, looking at our ruins as we look at Khufu's pyramid, may know what we built without knowing who we were. The silence of the Great Pyramid, the absence of the person behind the stone, is the most eloquent testimony to the limits of human permanence. We can build things that last forever. We cannot make ourselves last forever. The gap between the durability of stone and the fragility of memory is the central fact of human existence, and the Great Pyramid is its most powerful illustration. The building is still here. The builder is gone, and no amount of stone, not 6 million tons, not 60 million, can change that equation. The Great Pyramid invites us to consider what, if anything, from our own civilization will endure on a comparable timescale. The question is not academic, it is existential. We live in a world of unprecedented technological capability, a world that can split atoms, map genomes, and send machines to the edge of the solar system. And yet the question of permanence haunts us. What will survive? What will the archaeologists of the far future find when they excavate our cities? The answer, almost certainly, is not what we would hope. Our most important information, our scientific knowledge, our cultural heritage, our historical records, is stored in digital formats that require a functioning technological infrastructure to access. Without electricity, without software, without the specific hardware designed to read specific file formats, our digital records are inert. Meaningless patterns of magnetic charge on a metal platter or electric states in a silicon chip. The Great Pyramid carries its information in its physical form, in the shape of its stones, the angles of its passages, the dimensions of its chambers. This information is accessible to anyone with eyes to see and hands to measure. Our digital information requires an entire technological civilization to read. The comparison is not comfortable, but it is instructive. It suggests that our civilization, for all its extraordinary achievements, has not solved the problem that Khufu was trying to solve, the problem of permanence. We have produced more knowledge than any previous civilization. We have stored it more comprehensively, but we have stored it in the most fragile medium ever devised, a medium that requires constant maintenance, constant energy, and constant technological renewal to remain accessible. If our civilization were to experience a discontinuity, A period of collapse, fragmentation, or simply neglect, the vast majority of our knowledge would be lost within a generation. Khufu's knowledge, the knowledge embedded in the Great Pyramid, has survived 4,500 years of discontinuity. The civilization that built it collapsed. The language that named it fell silent for 1,400 years. The religion that motivated it was abandoned, and yet the building endures, carrying its information in its stones, readable by anyone who takes the time to look. The lesson is clear. Physical permanence outlasts digital permanence. Stone outlasts silicon. Weight outlasts wavelength. This does not mean we should build pyramids. It means we should think more carefully about how we preserve what matters. The institutions that maintain our knowledge, the universities, the libraries, the archives, the museums, are more important than we realize. They are the human equivalent of limestone, the durable medium through which knowledge is transmitted from one generation to the next. When those institutions fail, the knowledge they maintain is at risk. And when the knowledge is lost, the gap between what we knew and what we know can take centuries to close, if it can be closed at all. The contemplation of the Great Pyramid also leads to a meditation on the nature of ambition itself. Khufu's ambition was extraordinary. To build the largest, most precisely engineered structure the world had ever seen. But the ambition was not original, it was inherited. From his father Sneferu, from the tradition of divine kingship that stretched back to the unification of Egypt, from the theological system that made the construction of the king's tomb the most important project in the kingdom. Khufu did not invent the pyramid tradition. He perfected it. His genius was not in conceiving of the pyramid, but in executing it at a level of precision and scale that no one before or since has matched. This distinction between invention and perfection is important because it bears on the question of credit. Who deserves the credit for the Great Pyramid? Khufu. Who commissioned and funded it? Hemiunu, who may have designed and directed it. Sneferu, whose engineers developed the techniques that made it possible. Djoser and Imhotep, who inaugurated the tradition of monumental stone construction. The anonymous workers who quarried, hauled, and placed the stone. The answer, of course, is all of them. The Great Pyramid is not the achievement of an individual. It is the achievement of a tradition that accumulated knowledge, skill, and ambition over the course of a century, and that reached its peak in a single, extraordinary building. The modern world tends to assign credit for great achievements to individuals, to the visionary leader, the genius inventor, the charismatic entrepreneur, but the Khufu story suggests that this tendency is misleading. Great achievements are produced by systems, not by individuals. The Great Pyramid was produced by a system of knowledge, organization, and labor that had been developing for a century before Khufu was born. Khufu's contribution was to push the system to its limit, but the system itself, the accumulated knowledge, the trained workforce, the administrative apparatus, was the real author of the achievement. Without the system, Khufu could not have built a garden wall, let alone a pyramid. This insight has implications far beyond the ancient world. It suggests that the conditions that produce extraordinary achievement, the accumulation of knowledge, the development of organizational capacity, the training of skilled practitioners, are more important than the individual who happens to be at the helm when the achievement occurs. Khufu was, in a sense, lucky to be born at the moment when the Egyptian pyramid building tradition had reached the peak of its capabilities, when the knowledge was deepest, the workforce was most experienced, and the administrative systems were most efficient. If he had been born a century earlier, the technology would not have been ready. If he had been born a century later, the tradition would have been declining. He was the right person at the right time, and the result was the most extraordinary building in human history. The weight of this realization settles slowly, like dust after a desert wind. We have been talking tonight about a building, about stone, about measurements, about angles and passages and chambers. But the Great Pyramid is not really about stone, it is about time. It is about the human relationship with time, the desire to resist it, to outlast it, to build something so massive and so permanent that time itself cannot destroy it. Khufu was at war with time, and the Great Pyramid is his weapon, the most effective weapon against impermanence that any human being has ever devised. The war is not over. Time continues to erode the pyramid, grain by grain, century by century, in a process so slow that it is invisible to the human eye. But the pyramid continues to resist. It has been resisting for 4,500 years, and it will continue to resist for thousands of years to come. The war between the building and the force that would destroy it is the longest war in human history. And the building is winning. We have spent tonight inside the Great Pyramid, tracing its passages, measuring its chambers, counting its blocks, and searching for the man who built it. We have followed the engineering tradition from Djoser's step pyramid through Sneferu's 3 experiments to Khufu's masterpiece. We have examined the workforce that built the pyramid, the administrative systems that organized it, and the religious beliefs that justified it. And we have confronted the central paradox of Khufu's legacy. The building survived, but the builder did not. What does this mean for us? What does the story of Khufu and his pyramid tell us about the world we inhabit today? The first implication is humbling. Nothing we build today is designed to last 4,500 years. Our most ambitious constructions, our skyscrapers, our bridges, our dams, are designed for lifespans measured in decades or centuries, not millennia. The Great Pyramid, built with the simplest of technologies, will outlast every structure currently standing on the surface of the earth. The lesson is not that we should build pyramids. The lesson is that permanence is possible, that it was achieved once, with primitive tools and human muscle, and that our failure to achieve it today is a choice, not a necessity. The second implication concerns the nature of knowledge. The builders of the Great Pyramid possessed knowledge that we cannot fully reconstruct. Knowledge of quarrying, transport, alignment, and construction that was transmitted through practice and apprenticeship, and that was lost when the practice diminished. We face the same risk today. Our own knowledge, the engineering skills, the scientific expertise, the organizational capabilities that sustain modern civilization, is maintained through institutions that require continuous support to function. If those institutions fail, the knowledge they maintain will be at risk, and the gap between what we know and what future generations will know could be as wide as the gap between Khufu's builders and the builders of the 6th dynasty. The third implication is personal. Khufu built the largest tomb in human history, and his body was stolen. He built the most permanent monument on Earth, and his identity was lost. The Great Pyramid preserved his name but not his person. The lesson is not that monuments are futile. The Great Pyramid has served its purpose for 4,500 years and continues to serve it today. The lesson is that monuments are not enough. To be remembered, truly remembered, as a person rather than an artifact, requires something more than stone. It requires stories. It requires the voices of the people who knew you, the accounts of the people who served you, the records of the people who loved or feared or admired you. Khufu had none of this. His civilization did not value biography. It valued theology, and the theology has faded, leaving only the stone. Our own civilization values biography. We record our lives in unprecedented detail. We photograph ourselves, we film ourselves, we write about ourselves, we share ourselves on platforms that reach billions of people. And yet the question persists. Will any of it last? Will the digital records of our lives survive the obsolescence of the formats in which they are stored? Will the servers that house our memories outlast the pyramids? The answer, almost certainly, is no. Our digital legacy is far more fragile than Khufu's stone one. And the irony is bitter. We have more to say about ourselves than any previous civilization, but we may leave less behind. The Great Pyramid does not offer solutions to these dilemmas. It offers perspective. It reminds us that the ambition to endure is as old as civilization itself, and that the gap between ambition and achievement is as wide as it has ever been. We can build things that last. We cannot make ourselves last. The pyramid endures. The pharaoh is gone. The connection between the Great Pyramid and our own moment in history is not merely academic. We are living through a period of extraordinary technological capability, a period in which the total sum of human knowledge doubles every few years, in which the power of our tools exceeds anything the ancient world could have imagined, in which the possibilities for permanent achievement seem limitless. And yet we are also living through a period of extraordinary impermanence. A period in which the lifespan of our technologies is measured in years rather than centuries, in which the media that store our knowledge become obsolete within a decade, in which the buildings we construct are designed to be replaced within a generation. The Great Pyramid challenges this impermanence. It stands as evidence that human beings are capable of creating something that endures, something that survives not just for centuries, but for millennia. And it asks, implicitly, why we have stopped trying. Why do we build for decades when our ancestors built for millennia? Why do we accept impermanence as inevitable when the Great Pyramid proves it is not? The answer is complicated. Our priorities are different. Our needs are different. Our technologies are different. We build for function rather than for eternity, because function is what our civilization values. Speed, efficiency, adaptability, innovation. We do not need our buildings to last 4,500 years. We need them to serve their purpose for a few decades, and then make way for something better. But the Great Pyramid reminds us that there is value in permanence, value that is not captured by the calculus of function and efficiency, the value of knowing that something we built will outlast us, the value of leaving a mark that the future cannot ignore, the value of saying, through the language of stone and geometry, we were here, and what we built will stand as long as the earth endures. Khufu said it, and it has been standing for 4,500 years. Khufu said it, and it has been standing for 4,500 years, and yet the name persists. Khufu, Khnum Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid. We speak his name tonight, more than 4,500 years after his death. And in doing so, we grant him exactly what he sought, not the immortality of the body, which was stolen, but the immortality of the name, which endures. The pyramid has done its work, not as a tomb, the tomb was violated, but as a vessel for a name, the most expensive name tag in human history. 6 million tons of stone arranged in the shape of a perfect pyramid for the sole purpose of ensuring that one name, Khufu, would be spoken forever. And it has been. It is being spoken now. The final reflection that the Great Pyramid demands is one of gratitude. Gratitude to the builders, the anonymous tens of thousands who quarried, hauled, and placed the stone, whose names are preserved only in red ochre graffiti on blocks that were never meant to be seen. Gratitude to the archaeologists, Petri, Lena, Hawass, and the generations of scholars who have devoted their careers to understanding the monument and the civilization that produced it. Gratitude to the scribes and priests of ancient Egypt who maintain the records and traditions that allow us to connect the building to its history. And gratitude, however qualified, to Khufu himself, the pharaoh who had the vision, the resources, and the determination to build something that would outlast everything else. The Great Pyramid is not just a monument to Khufu, it is a monument to the human capacity for organized achievement. It is evidence that we, the same species that struggles with traffic and forgets where it put its keys, are capable, under the right conditions, of creating something so large, so precise, and so permanent that it endures for millennia without maintenance, without repair, without even the attention of the civilization that built it. The Great Pyramid is proof of what we can do, and in a world that often emphasizes what we cannot do, what we cannot fix, what we cannot solve, what we cannot change, that proof is valuable. We build, we have always built, we will always build, and sometimes, when the ambition is great enough and the will is strong enough and the knowledge is deep enough, what we build can last forever. There is a building on the Giza Plateau, on the western edge of the city of Cairo, that has been standing for more than 4,500 years. It rises from the desert in a shape so simple and so perfect that it has become the symbol of human civilization itself. It is made of stone, nothing but stone, cut from the earth, hauled across the sand, and stacked in courses so regular and so precise that the result seems less like a building than like a geological formation, as though the earth itself had pushed up a mountain of limestone, sheathed it in white, and crowned it with gold. But the earth did not make this. Human beings made it. Men and women, quarrymen and bakers, surveyors and priests, scribes and labourers, working together over a span of roughly 20 years, moved and placed more than 2 million blocks of stone each weighing more than the average car, to create a structure that has outlasted every other building on the planet. The man who ordered its construction was called Khufu. He was the second pharaoh of Egypt's fourth dynasty. He ruled for roughly 23 years. He wanted to live forever, and in a way he never imagined he succeeded. His body is gone. His mummy has never been found. The treasures that were buried with him have been stolen. The granite sarcophagus in the king's chamber is empty. The only confirmed image of his face is a 7.5 centimeter ivory figurine found in a rubbish heap. The man behind the most famous building on Earth has been reduced to almost nothing. But the pyramid stands, and in that standing, in the sheer, stubborn, immovable persistence of 6 million tons of stacked limestone, lies the answer to every question we have asked tonight. The Great Pyramid is not a failure. It is the most successful human construction ever built. It has done exactly what it was designed to do. It has endured. It has survived the fall of the Old Kingdom, the invasions of the Persians and the Greeks and the Romans. It has survived the Arab conquest and the Ottoman Empire. It has survived the Napoleonic Wars and the British occupation. It has survived earthquakes, tomb robbers, stone thieves, and the slow erosion of 4,500 years of desert wind. It has survived everything that time could throw at it. And it is still here. And yet the pyramid stands. That is the answer to the question that brought us here tonight. Who was the man behind the Great Pyramid of Giza? He was a pharaoh who inherited the engineering knowledge of a century of pyramid building and pushed it to its absolute limit. He was a ruler who commanded the most sophisticated administrative apparatus in the ancient world and directed its full power toward the construction of a single monument. He was a human being who wanted what all human beings want: to be remembered, to endure, to leave a mark on the world that would outlast his mortal body. He achieved his goal. The mark he left is the largest, the most precise, and the most enduring mark that any human being has ever left on the surface of the earth. It has been standing for 4,500 years. It will stand for 4,500 more. And as long as it stands, the name of the man who built it will be spoken, in languages he could not have imagined, by people he could not have conceived, in a future so distant from his own time that even the stars have shifted in the sky. Khufu built a pyramid. The pyramid preserved his name. The name has echoed across 4.5 millennia, growing louder with each generation that discovers the monument and asks, who built this? How? Why? The night falls over Giza. The city lights of Cairo glow orange against the sky. And the Great Pyramid, dark, silent, massive, rises against the stars as it has risen every night for more than 45 centuries. It does not explain itself. It does not justify itself. It simply stands, the oldest, the largest, and the most enduring testament to what human beings can build when they commit everything they have to a single overwhelming vision. Khufu is gone. The pyramid remains ons. And the name, spoken softly in the dark by someone listening at 2 in the morning, crosses the silence of 4,500 years and arrives undimmed in the present. Khufu, builder of the Great Pyramid, the man behind the stone. Remember him. The Great Pyramid will be here tomorrow. It will be here next year. It will be here in 100 years. It will almost certainly be here in 1,000 years. And in all probability, it will be standing in some recognizable form 5,000 years from now, 10 millennia after the first foundation stones were laid. No other human creation can make this claim. No other building, no other artifact, no other monument comes close to the Great Pyramid's demonstrated capacity for endurance. And in the quiet of the night, in the hush that falls over the Giza Plateau when the last tourists have gone and the last buses have departed, the Great Pyramid stands alone with the desert and the stars, the same stars that the ancient builders watched when they aligned the passages, the same desert that their workers crossed carrying blocks of stone, the same silence that fell over the plateau when the last foreman called the final work gang home and the pyramid stood complete for the first time, gleaming white in the Egyptian sun, crowned with gold, the largest and most permanent thing that human hands had ever made. That moment, the moment of completion, the moment when the last capstone was placed and the scaffolding was removed and the full, finished pyramid was revealed for the first time was a moment that no human being had ever experienced before, and no human being has experienced anything quite like it since. The Great Pyramid stands. The man behind it is a ghost, but the ghost has a name, and the name, Khufu, spoken across 4,500 years of silence, is proof that even ghosts can endure if the stone that carries them is strong enough. The ivory statuette sits in the Cairo Museum, 7.5 centimeters of carved bone, the only face of the man who built the largest monument on Earth. It is small enough to hold in a closed fist. The pyramid it represents is large enough to be seen from space. Between the two, between the tiny portrait and the colossal tomb, lies the entire mystery of Khufu, a man reduced to a figurine, an ambition preserved in stone, and a silence that 4,500 years have not been able to break.